Alright, so now we're going to take a look at how to do some stuff with these arrays once they're initialized. So far we've only really taken a look at how to initialize different types of arrays. Now we're going to take a look at accessing and modifying elements within these arrays. So we're going to create some arrays. One's going to be an integer array and one's going to be a string array, and we're just going to access some elements within them. So these are going to be arrays that we've already initialized. And once we've accessed the elements, I'm going to show you how to change those values once the array is initialized, so that we might initialize an array of something like 5, 6, 7, and then maybe we want to change the second element to 10, so then we'd have 5, 10, 7. Alright, so now we've seen a few different types of arrays. So we've seen stuff like Boolean arrays, we've seen integer, floats, and double arrays, and then we've also seen character and string arrays. So these were the 6 types of variables we talked about in our variable tutorial, and these are the 6 types of arrays that we've seen so far. Okay, so we've learned basically what each type of array looks like, how to initialize it, and some examples of where we might see these kinds of arrays in the code. So it's a good idea to kind of think about where you're going to see these, because when it comes time to actually make these arrays, then you can decide which is the best way to represent things. For example, do you use a string array or do you use an integer array? So would it be best to have an array of numbers, or do you want those numbers represented as strings, because perhaps you're adding them into text, in which case you usually have to convert them to a string. So it's a good idea to have a good idea of where you're going to be using these different types of arrays. Now we're going to be looking at how to change arrays up, or how to modify them a little bit and access different elements or add elements in. This part will focus on how to access and modify elements within an array. So the way we're going to demonstrate that is I'm first going to create this array. It's going to be called int array, and it's going to be an array of integers. We're just going to initialize it to contain some values of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so we've seen how to do this before. This is just creating an array 4 units long, and they're all integers, and it contains 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, let's say we want to access an individual element from this array. Well, we do that by calling the name and then the specified index. So one thing to note, I know this is going to give me, oh there we go. One thing to note here is that I called 0 and it printed out 1. So indexing in arrays starts at 0. Now this isn't true of all languages, but it is true of Swift 3 and I think most languages. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2, and index 3, but still element 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So that's just something to keep in mind. Watch that you're not confused about that. So make sure that if you're calling elements within your array, always the indexing starts at 0, so keep that in mind. Alright, so what we've done is I've just called the name of the array that we're searching for, or rather that we're interested in, and the index that I want the element from. So this is saying I want to look in int array and I want the element at index 0, which is in this case 1. Okay, so same with if we did int array of element, or index 1, int array index 2, and int array index 3. Okay, and while we wait for this to update, there we go. So we get 1, 2, 3, and 4 printed out, because the element index 0 is a 1, element index 1 is a 2, at 2 is a 3, and at 3 is a 4. Okay, so this is how you access individual elements. Sometimes we might want to store these in a variable, so you could say something like variable first element of type int equals int array at 0, and that's fine to do. This is just taking the current value of this and storing it in a variable. However, if we were to change up this variable, so first element equals 5, so it used to equal 1, now it equals 5, it doesn't change the value within this array. And the reason it doesn't change is because we're not actually calling this element and changing it. We first stored whatever value this was in an element, so this has a value of 1, and now this has a value of 1, and we're only changing this value, okay? So we're only changing the first element's value, not the value of int array 0. And we'd see that if we were to print out int array of 0. So we'd see that it should still be a 1, and indeed it is, okay? So the way we would change that actual element is we'd do int array of 0, and we'd call, let's say we want to make it 10. So now it would be 10. And we see it hasn't changed up here because when we initialized it, it contained these values. Just like first element, when we initialized it, it contains 1, but now it contains 5. So if we were to now call int array of 0, let's see, it should take on its new value. And there we go. See, now it's 10. So this array now reads 10, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So that's how to modify elements within an array. So we've looked at how to access them, first just kind of by calling the name and then the index. Remember that indexing starts at 0. And we can store elements in variables if we want. And we've done that and we modified it. So if you modify the element after you call something from the array, it doesn't change the actual array value. It's just the value of that variable. However, in order to modify the element of the array itself, we have to call the name of the array, the index, and then pass it a new value, and then it will change. So again, in this case, because we change a value at index 0 to 10, this now reads 10, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so that's how to modify elements. And I used integer arrays to do this, but we can do the same with string arrays. So if we create this variable string array, and we'll pass it in some values so that you know it's of type string. And yeah, so let's pass in some values of mammoth and interactive. And again, so let's say we want to call the first element, so string array of 0. And we should get mammoth printed out. Interesting. What seems to be the issue? Consecutive. Oh, huh. It's weird. I didn't think it was on the same line. What if we put the semicolon there? That should be fine. I wonder why this issue's there. I'm declaring it of type there. Okay, there we go. That was the issue. Okay, I see. All right, so here we go. Here's our string array, mammoth interactive. It contains 2 strings. First one's mammoth, second one's interactive. And we're just calling the very first element, which is mammoth here. Okay, and if we really want, again, we can modify this. We can say equals hello. And we can print it out again. So string array of 0 should be hello now. Let's wait for this to update. And yeah, so it contains a value hello. So if we were to read this string array, it would read hello and interactive. Okay, so now you've seen how to modify and access elements within an array. To access it, you just call the name of the array and the element or the index you want. Remember, indexing starts at 0. And to modify it, you basically just access it. So call the name and the index you want to change and assign the new value. But again, keeping in mind that you have to pass the same value as the type of the array already contains. Okay, so that's how to access and modify elements within an array. We'll be looking at some different functions that we can call on arrays in this next part. Okay, so in this part of the tutorial, we looked at accessing and modifying array elements. So we access elements by calling the array name and then the index in the square brackets beside it. So keep in mind that indexing does start at 0 rather than at 1. So the first element will be at index 0 and the last element will be at the index of the length minus 1. Okay, so we just call the name of the array and then whatever index we want, and it will represent the specified element within an array. Now we change elements by first accessing them the same way, and then we just give them new values by saying equals and then whatever new value we want, just as long as the new value we assign is the same type as the type of the array that we're assigning to. Okay, so next time we're going to be looking at, or rather in this next part, we'll be looking at some cool little functions that we can perform on arrays.